welcome to Easy as Pie. For today's pie, we are going to need 3 crusts to work with. So we're going to start off with 3 cups of flour and 3/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to mix that together with my whisk attachment, kind of combine it evenly. And now we're going to add our 3/4 cup of butter flavored Crisco. This is one of my favorite baking tools because there is no waste and no mess. I will put a link to this awesome baking tool in the description box below. Now I'm going to kind of combine it a little bit together to spread out that shortening a little bit, so when I turn my mixer on, it won't send flour flying everywhere. In real time, this takes about 30 to 45 seconds to mix this together. We're going to try to get it to a crumbly kind of mixture. As you can see, I adjust the speed a little bit occasionally until I have a good crumbly mixture. I'm going to bring a close-up here so you can see what it looks like. It's no longer just like flour, but you can see that the shortening is pretty evenly distributed. That's what's going to help us get our good flavored crust. Now it's time to add the water. You can always add more water. You can never add less. So I added 6 tablespoons of water for my 3 cups of flour, and we're going to see how that goes. We're going to let that combine. Now, all of this can be done by hand. It just goes much faster with a stand mixer. All right, I'm checking the consistency here. When I squeeze it together, the edges kind of fall apart, so it didn't have quite enough water, so I'm adding 2 more tablespoons of water to the pie crust. Now I can tell I already like the consistency of this crust. The more water you use, the less flaky your crust is. So when I squeeze it, it holds its shape and the edge doesn't fall off. That shows me that it's ready. So I'm going to split this into 3 separate crust dough balls. The first one is going to be for our bottom crust, so it can be a little flakier. I realized at this point I needed a little bit more. The second one is going to be for our lattice crust, and then the third one is going to be for coloring. So I added just another tablespoon of water because I want that to be very easy to work with and not falling apart and crumbly. So here I am just putting it all together, and then I'm going to put it back in the pan or the mixing bowl and cover it. Oxygen will dry out your pie crust, and I'm going to show you what happens if you don't keep your pie crust covered in between while you're working with it. I have these awesome parchment paper sheets that my friend gave me that she picked up on Amazon. I love them. I'll also link to that in the description box. Here I'm making my bottom crust. Now I want my bottom crust to be very flaky, so you can see I have the least amount of water possible in this particular crust because I want to be flaky, and occasionally I have to lift up my parchment papers and adjust the crust shape itself. I also need to insert an apology here. This is my very first YouTube video I've ever made. So with pies, I had no idea that I was so out of the frame. So please forgive me. Also, my sweet husband got me this camera for Christmas. Merry Christmas to me a little early. And I did not realize till after I had put this video together that there was a protective film over the lens. So that's awesome. My apologies. The next video will be better. So now I'm just peeling off the crust or off the parchment paper so I can see if this crust will fit. I have never used this pie pan before, and it is a deep dish pie pan. And so I didn't quite have it. It didn't work as quite as my normal pie pans that normal Ingles do, so I just trimmed my excess edges and did a little patching. This is totally fine for your bottom crust. When it bakes, it'll stick together and no one will be able to tell that you had to do a little adjusting. So I'm just going to doctor it up and see if I can just make it just right. Ta-da! One pie shell. Perfect. So this is what happens if you leave your pie crust uncovered while you're working on your other pie crust. It kind of turns into a crumbly mixture that won't stay together when you're rolling. So I added another tablespoon of water, and we are going to turn this into our lattice crust. It's more pliable to work with and easy. If you're feeling nervous about making your own crust, you can totally use store-bought crust for this, and it works just fine. I'm going to put the other pie crust that we're going to color later and cover it and put it to the side. And now I'm just going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to try to roll this into more of a rectangular shape so it makes for easy lattice strip making. You can see that I'm kind of picking it up occasionally, flipping it, lifting off the parchment paper to make it easier to remove from the parchment paper. I always like to protect my work surface by using a cutting board underneath. And I'm using a ruler. Mine happens to be clear. It doesn't have to be. I'm making one straight edge on the side, a straight edge on the top. And because this other edge was just so awful, I did that too, but it doesn't need to. And now I'm going to use my ruler and make a 1/2 inch mark with a butter knife all the way across. This is what we're going to turn our lattice strips into. So easy as pie right there. And now I'm going to use my ruler and cut these. If you're using a pizza cutter, I recommend that you put some pretty good pressure on it so they actually cut all the way through and peel apart easily. Otherwise, you'll pick up a strip and rip half of the other strip, the next one, off. You can also use a butter knife. I find if my kids are helping me, a butter knife works better for them than a pizza cutter. It's easier to control. So you can give this a try. Doing them in 1/2 inch strips just makes them uniform and look so lovely. There you go. Easy, easy. And now we're going to make our filling. I'm making a strawberry rhubarb pie today. And if you have frozen rhubarb like we do in the middle of December in Montana, because we're not growing anything right now, you just squeeze out the excess water when it's thawed. If you keep all that extra water in there, your pie will never set up and it will just be watery. I'm also going to strain my strawberries. So I used 3 cups of rhubarb and 2 cups of strawberries. And now we're going to make the filling. I'm going to start by just mixing it together, and then I'm going to add 1 cup of sugar to this. You can use 3/4 cup of sugar if you prefer to have more of a tart pie. And then I'm going to be adding some flour to make it thick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tablespoons of flour. But I'm using frozen fruit. Fruit that has been frozen, I prefer to use 6 tablespoons of flour because it makes a really firm set pie instead of a liquidy pie. You can see that the juices around it are a creamy color. If you can see through it, then that means your pie will not set up and you can add a couple more tablespoons. So as I mentioned, I've never used this deep dish pie pan before, and it is turning out to be a little bit of a disaster for my very first video because it was not enough filling, not even close. So I made some more. And of course, I ran out of strawberries, so we added some raspberries. Your pie pan needs to be filled at least 3/4 of the way. It will rise when it bakes and it will fluff up, so 3/4 of the way is just fine. Now it is time to color our dough for our ornaments. This pie was designed with my 12-year-old daughter, so she wanted to join in and help me make these things. We have liquid food coloring in the green and the red, and then I have some gel food coloring in the yellow. And so what you do is you just add the coloring to your pie crust, and then you add a little bit of water. I had not told my daughter that at that point, and so she didn't add the water then. So you can kind of see on the gold side on the right that if you add the water, it mixes a lot better than if you just add the coloring itself. So she is going to work on adding some color and adding some water while I roll out my gold. The gold of the gel food coloring was looking a little orangish to me. So I added a little bit of liquid yellow food coloring to it, which I'm doing right here to see if I could lighten the color a little bit. And my daughter's cruising right along on the green. This is kind of a play it by ear and see how it goes. She was worried she was doing it wrong, so she asked me to roll it out and see if I could give her some tips. And I did help her with that, but then she finished. And now let me show you how to do it on the red. So I started by getting it a little wet, and instead of folding it over and kneading it, I just kind of pushed it around and kneaded it into itself. Then I folded my parchment paper in half and rolled it out. My edges were still a little white and I wanted it a little darker, so I just added a little bit more, had a little bit more water until I got the color that I wanted. So at this point, I realized we should probably have 2 rolling pins in this house. But for now, we're doing all right. You can see one side is not dyed at all, the other side is. Here's our red. Here's our final green. It kind of has a marbly color. Now it is time to make the lattice part of the pie. So I counted how many strips I had, and I had 23, which meant I could do easily 10 on each lattice portion of the pie. So here I am putting 10 strips across the pie. I thought that was fantastic. Then I counted and realized I had missed one. Okay, so now to make lattice pie, you go every other strip and add a strip going the opposite direction. Then you gently flip them back over. Now this is double speed. You want to go a little bit slow when you do this. And now we're going to do the opposite. So if it was over before, it goes under. If it was under before, it goes over. So basically it's still just every other one. That top piece was kind of going to be in the way, so I just took it off. It wouldn't stay on. And I put those lattice pieces back on. It doesn't really matter what the left of the pie looks like as you are working your way over. What matters is the part that you're latticing. So if it looks a little crazy in some spots, that's okay. You'll adjust it as you go through. Okay, so now we're on our third row. Again, it's every other strip. So you can see, we just take the next one and add it on there. And you try to keep them even spaced. So that one, that row, the ones I'm pulling are going over. So the next time they will stay down and the other ones will go up. So they'll be over. So lattice pie crusts aren't as tricky as they appear. It's just really as simple as that. So I think at this point my daughter asked if she could have a turn to give it a try. And I said, sure, let me finish this one and you can have the next turn. Just keep doing every other one. Here she goes. She's going to give it a try, puts it on there, kind of evens it out the best she can. Again, it doesn't really matter what the left side of the pie looks like. We're just going to cruise along until we have 10 strips across. We counted our strips and only had 9. So we added our last one in and pressed around the edges to seal everything together, and then took a butter knife and trimmed the edges on the pie. Now it is time to make our ornaments. So we made paper stencils, I guess you would call them, our ornaments the way we wanted to look. My daughter actually was the one that designed them, and so I just would put it on there. She would just put it on there, and we would trim it out with a steak knife. Again, I always like to protect my work surfaces. I recommend that you do that too. And then we just figured out how to put the ornaments together to make them look like the paper one that she had drawn out. So that's what we're doing here. Using different tools and adjusting things, trying different ways to see what we liked best. Pretty close. Here we are going to be using little fondant cutting tools. They are really awesome. They're really inexpensive. They come in all sorts of varieties, and they just make awesome uniform shapes in the tiniest shapes possible. So it makes really fun. I've had these for about 2 years and I use them all the time. It was totally worth the money to get them if you're going to be making pies or cakes of any kind. Next, we needed to make the strips to hold the ornaments on, the strings, I guess you would say. So we thought we wanted natural colored strips for our ornaments. We were really happy how the ornaments turned out, to see her vision come to life, so to say. So now was the really fun part. We started adding the ornaments to the pie to see how we liked them and adjusted them as needed. We started adding the hanging strips and decided that the natural strips just didn't stand up out enough on the natural background. So we played around with the colors until we found what we liked. We eventually decided to put a red hanging strip for the green ornaments and green hanging strips for the red-based ornaments. And then we couldn't quite decide what to do for the bell. And so we finally settled on making a gold strip for the bell. And as we adjusted things, we redid a couple of things and just kind of played with it and had fun. It was really starting to come together. To finish off this pie, we wanted to make a beautiful red border. So I did what I did earlier to make the strips. I marked 1/2-inch tally marks with a butter knife and then sliced them into 1/2-inch pieces. And then we began to add them around the edge of the pie. Just like this. And although we liked this look, we wanted to see if we can make it just a little bit fancier. Oops, move that part. We kind of went around and pushed it down a little bit, but I wanted to make a nicer edge. So what you do is with your left hand, you use your pointer finger, and with your right hand, you use your pointer finger and your thumb, and you pinch around the tip of your left pointer finger. We tried to do that with her holding it up so you could see it closer, which was a little bit of a struggle. But here it is. You just put your finger down and pinch, and it creates this really beautiful edge. We decided at this point we definitely wanted a bow on the top of the pie. In hindsight, I wish we would have done it gold. So if you're making this pie, give it a try in gold. But we decided to start with green at that moment, and she just pieced together a beautiful bow. I took a little bit of red and we made a bow for the top of the pie. Here we are transferring it over, putting it on. Here it is. How fun is that? Now we are ready for the final step. This is a tip from my grandmother, who was an amazing pie baker. She would put milk or cream on the pie crust. And if you're using colored pie crust, do the natural pie crust first because it can kind of tint your milk colors a little bit. And then she would generously sprinkle it with sugar. My daughter put some yellow or some golden sprinkles on the bell, so it would be shiny like that. And then I'm using this sanding sugar that I purchased at Walmart, and it is just extra sparkly. You can use cinnamon sugar if you're making a pie that goes with, or just regular sugar, but apply it there liberally and it will be an amazing crust. All right,